James Crepea covers Oregon. Oregonian. Fox Sports Eugene has a talk show there. Also now joins us on Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports, which he's done before. James, we discussed a little bit early on today. Obviously, next week they start having the college football rankings, the playoff rankings, whatever. I don't pay attention to that, but it's always good fodder. Is that even a discussion right now with the angst of Ohio State being ranked ahead of a team that beat them straight up in Oregon?
I think it is among fans. I think it is among radio listeners sometimes. I mean, I think there's the disconnect between I'll wear my primary hat here, reporters and the stuff that we write about and really kind of sink our teeth into at times sometimes. And sometimes just the minutia that fans actually delve into as much. Because for us, I mean, I'll just speak as a reporter here or even as a radio show host, quite frankly. To me, it's always like, all right, what's the second sentence of the rankings conversation exactly? Like, all right, someone's ahead of somebody else. Well, it can change in a week. The season still has 5, 6, 8, 10 more weeks, depending on what time of the season we're talking about. So I'm with you. Like, to me, all right, the initial ranking, I don't put any stock into it per se, other than that it is the first sort of initial assessment of where the committee feels teams are. And then you usually see the AP poll actually correspond more to what the committee thinks coming thereafter. Other than that, obviously, we know that there's a whole lot of games to play. Mm-hmm. Do I think it makes a lot of sense, though, that for the human polls, whether we're talking the coaches poll or the AP poll, for Ohio State to be ahead of Oregon? Not right now, no. No, I don't. And you could say, wow, what are you talking about? Ohio State's been throttling its opponents. Yeah, the worst opponents in the Big Ten East. Yes, Ohio State has been a dominant team against the absolute worst teams in its division here. Absolutely right. And Oregon has been very inconsistent, including against a absolutely atrocious Arizona team that is the worst team not only in the Pac-12, probably the worst team in the Power 5, and one of the worst in all of college football. Absolutely. Well, there might be a degree of context to that because Oregon was without a pretty significant number of its really important players on defense amid some of the struggles that was happening in the first half of the season. Now, look, Saturday is an example where Ohio State has a better opponent. I don't think Penn State is phenomenal, but better ranked, at least, opponent on Saturday. And Oregon gets a cupcake in Colorado, who's struggling mightily. If the Ducks go out and dominate a bad Colorado team on national television and Ohio State plays a closer game against Penn State, I think you start to see things equal out a little bit, relatively speaking. I also think you see that Ohio State's strength of schedule will improve dramatically just by playing Penn State on Saturday.
James, is this Oregon team a team that can dominate people, though? Even though they're a good team, is it necessarily, do they have that club in their bag because of maybe the way that they play?
Well, can they dominate the teams on their schedule that they have left is really the question that matters. Can they dominate those teams? Certainly with Saturday and Colorado, I'd say the answer is yes, they can. They most definitely can. Oregon's problem has been, since the Ohio State game, beyond injuries, yes. And every team could say, well, every team's got injuries. Listen, outside of LSU, and I'm forgetting one or two others who've had really enormous lists of injuries, but LSU really got crushed in particular. Oregon's injury list is vast, and it includes some of its most important players. Arizona has had the quarterback position in particular, but not necessarily everywhere else. Well, they have had a tendency to play down to their competition since the Ohio State game, when they also happen to be without Kayvon Thibodeau, who for the past 2 weeks has put on a showcase and pass rush and showing that, oh yeah, by the way, he is the best defensive player in the sport, and by most people's estimation, a virtual lock to be the number one pick in the NFL draft. Well, when you don't have that guy on the field, guys, and you didn't have him against Ohio State either, but you don't have him on the field. And now you can say, well, you don't need that guy to beat a FCS team or a bad Arizona team. Well, they did beat Arizona and pull away by 22 points. It was window dressing at the end, but they won by 22 points. And they beat that crappy FCS team by 41. A little bit of window dressing late, too. But the final score is the final score. If we're talking about playoff and, how the committee views those things and data points, the end result is there. If we want to go back to the original playoff conversation of 2014, and this is starting to feel the same way, quite frankly, for Oregon, and it was Florida State then, and we were talking about game control, a totally made-up metric.
Yep.
But that's what we're talking about, right? Can they dominate? Can they just whack somebody from the start and have a 4-possession lead for 35 minutes? Well, they can definitely do that against Colorado because Colorado doesn't have a hat to hang anything on, let alone the peg to do it with either. I mean, especially if they're without Nate Lamb, and they just don't have very much to their credit right now. After that, look, I'm never going to look past anybody on anyone's schedule. Washington's a rival. Obviously, they're having a terrible season for them, particularly if they go out and lose at Stanford on Saturday. It's not very good by way of what the record will look like going into that game. But it's a rivalry game. It's in Seattle. Tough environment. We'll see. Washington State just fired its coach, but yet they're a 4-4 team. They play Arizona State on Saturday. I don't know what exactly they'll look like by the time they come into Autzen, but not a terrific team, certainly. And the final 2 games are the 2 better teams left on their schedule. So if Oregon were to dominate a trip to Utah or dominate an Oregon State team, who I actually think is one of the most underrated teams in all of college football this season, the fact that they're not even ranked is mind-blowing to me. I cannot fathom that another 5-2 team who's 3-1 in their league and tied for the division lead, having just beaten the other division leader. I can't fathom that if that was the case in any other league in the country, that team would be unranked. But here we are in the Pac-12, where Oregon State is routinely on the Pac-12 network. Nobody gets to watch them, and nobody gets to see that they have the best rushing attack in the league. But if Oregon were to dominate them and finish off the regular season at 11-1, there is live a bullet in the conversation of the playoff as it gets. But can they do it? They have the capability defensively now at full health to be really dominant on that side.
I'm with you on Oregon State. I'm a big B.J. Baylor fan, being he's from Texas, keeping track of him. He's had a really nice year. I know there's been a lot of talk, James, about Anthony Brown in the quarterback position. What have been your thoughts on his performance so far?
On the whole, quite honestly, he's kind of basically performed like I thought he would, insofar as I was never blown away by his statistics at Boston College. I wasn't. Look, he suffered 2 different ACL tears, so I don't use that as a knock on him in any way, shape, or form. Credit to his resiliency, credit to his ability to come back from multiple significant knee injuries and still be a viable dual threat college quarterback. But his statistics at Boston College, when I looked at them, I mean, wasn't exactly the most accurate of passers, and I know they didn't have a lot of talent around him, but that league doesn't exactly have a lot of very good defenses outside of Clemson in those years and Pittsburgh here or there. But by the by, that the ACC is pretty bad, and he didn't have the greatest numbers while he was there. So I didn't think he was going to be lighting up the world while he was out here. And at times, he has done well in the fourth quarters of games. He has been all right until the late interceptions last week. Those were not very good throws, but taking those 2 throws aside, he had been nothing short of spectacular in the first half of the season in the fourth quarter. His problem was that the third quarter was the complete polar opposite. It was that the third quarter, he was one of the worst quarterbacks in the Power 5. And the fourth quarter, he was one of, if not the best quarterback in all of college football in the fourth quarter. You're going, all right, so which quarterback are you getting here? And that's really his story so far this season. He's been a mark of inconsistency in his decision-making, in his throws and accuracy. Now, look, having said that, what does it mean going forward? Well, look, this happens with rookie quarterbacks in the NFL, with first-round quarterbacks in the NFL. Well, that's higher caliber competition. Yeah, but those guys already went through college football. Those guys already played against probably some pretty good teams. Like Trevor Lawrence played against how many good defenses, loaded defenses when he was at Clemson, whether it was in playoffs against Ohio State or Alabama or you name it. He faced plenty of really good teams with lots of NFL caliber players while he was in college. Well, the game got harder for him, and he has to work with other receivers for the first time, whatever. Did he still have camp? Did he still have an off-season? Yeah, but he learned it at that level. Well, Anthony Brown at the college level here, still relatively speaking, new to Oregon. Yeah, he was here last year, but last year was quite screwy, as we all remember. Well, he's still developing chemistry with this receiver group. It's getting better. Last week was his best in that regard against a very bad UCLA pass defense, and they took advantage of it. That was a positive. His decision-making on the ground was a positive. Like I say, if not for the two late interceptions, one was entirely on him. The other was just it was a bad play from start to finish. It was a bad decision to throw. It was to pass in the first place rather than the run. By way of play call, bad strategy, bad play selection, bad throw, bad everything. It was just plain bad. But what does it mean for them going forward? It means they have an inconsistent quarterback who, the silver lining for Oregon fans, where a significant number of them want a quarterback change, but they're not going to be getting it this season, is he's not putting the ball in jeopardy. And, for everybody who wants to criticize his accuracy or say that a freshman would be performing better, and I don't think they're right anyway, he's not putting the ball in jeopardy. If they had lost the game at Stanford because of everything that he did, that'd be one thing. He helped lead a comeback in that game where, all right, yeah, he also had his one interception earlier on in the season, came in that game. In of itself, though, they didn't necessarily lose only because of him. There were issues all over the place that day. And that was a day where Joe Moorhead was rushed to the hospital, where the day before their, terrific starting nickel corner went down with a season-ending injury, where their running back went down with a season-ending injury during the game. A lot of things went. Oh, and then, by the way, during the 2-minute drive at the end, some very questionable penalty calls that took place that led to overtime. So a lot of things happened in that game. Bottom line, they're a top 10 team, and they've got a level of inconsistency at quarterback. But the last, not just this past week, even going back the week before, frankly, his decision-making was starting to get a little bit better. But, hey, every fan base, especially fan bases who are hoping for playoff teams, everybody wants their quarterback to be, the best quarterback in the country. And, basically, the Oregon fan base feels very much, I think, like the Oklahoma fan base regarding their quarterback at times.
James Kreppy is our guest from the Oregonian. We have time for one more question. Craig?
Yeah, James, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, because it is coaching carousel season, and you know that Mario Cristobal's name gets thrown around with these searches coming up. Your thoughts just on that, his place at Oregon, and the fact that there will be some teams, obviously, that have interest in him, but just your thoughts as we start to get in the heat of coaching carousel season.
Oh, for sure. And look, I'm by no means his spokesman or his agent in any stretch of the imagination. But Mario signed a new deal a year ago. I have no doubt in any way, shape, or form that when a coach has, success, other people come calling. That's the business. So whether we're talking about SC or LSU or a school to be named later, you're going to have to pony up a boatload of money in the first place to do whatever firings you're going to do, which obviously SC and LSU have already done. But in order to be then just buying out Mario of his current spot, the cost of doing business is $9 million. That's just to start the conversation. Then he's already making in the mid-4s by way of base salary, and then there are bonuses whereby that goes up quite significantly in a hurry for 9 wins, 10 wins, 11 wins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Winning a division, winning the league, making the playoffs. If they were to make the playoff this year, you can totally forget it. He ain't going. No coach in the playoff is going to leave their situation. I'm not even sure Luke Fickell will leave the situation. How can you leave a team that could be competing for a national championship? That just is totally antithetical to me. But for Mario Cristobal specifically, his salary could go well north of $5.5, closer to $6 million if they were to make the playoff. Well, it's $9 million to buy him out. He's going to be at over $6 to begin with. I'm not telling you that LSU or somebody else that can't afford some of those figures, but you start to get into that and coordinators and consider the buyouts that have already been paid in some of these places. And, I realize SEC's got crazy money, but sooner or later, there are some limits in the world, believe it or not. And to say also to the fact that I'm not telling you that he's actually available beyond the fact of the money. I think he likes it here a whole hell of a lot. He's recruited, and he and his staff have recruited consistent top 10 classes each year, and they have another one in the works where they're really best situated to compete for the playoff and national championships the next 3 years. This year, hey, they're back in the top 10. They could make it this year. But frankly, they're kind of ahead of schedule. It's really the next 3 years. And they open the season next year with Georgia. And that could be a rematch of a potential playoff matchup this year. Mm-hmm. So why, basically, why do you got to leave? If your intention is to compete for and play for championships, he's got a chance to do it now. He's got a chance to do it each of the next couple of years here with the way this roster is composed. This team is 60, 70% freshmen and sophomores. They're built for the long haul. They're not, this isn't a roster where it's like, oh, well, like that LSU team a couple of years ago when they won the championship. Well, they got 20-some-odd guys go to the draft. They're not going to have that, not even near that number, not even close to that. So, like I say, I never say never in this business. We've all seen crazy things. But with the way this team is constructed and contracts and everything else, I'm personally just not seeing it. But we've all seen crazy things happen, certainly.
James, great stuff. Great insight throughout the entire part of what's going on with Oregon, from who they've beaten, who they play, who they have left, what they've been dealing with, including the Mario Cristobal being a part of a name that will be part of any of the coaching searches of the big boy schools, and he's at one. We know how much money that Oregon has and the success they're having as well. We're going to hear from David Teal here in a moment. Richmond